Okay, thank you very much. Andrew, I know you do have some concerns about Google, but is Google too big?
Is Google too big? I'm going to answer this in the way that, as a Google tribute, in the way that Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, would answer a question, which is that he never answers the question but turns it upside down as a way of avoiding it. Quite sincerely, the question, is a company too big, is not one that necessarily should concern us. I think what we've kind of been skirting around a little bit is it a good thing for society? Because a company can be the biggest company in the world and do no harm. In fact, Google, somebody pointed out to me today, actually welcomes questions of whether it's too big, how big, this high, as a way of kind of avoiding the specificity of what it actually does. I want to introduce dance around the subject myself a little bit, but by introducing an anecdote, not about Google, but about Rupert Murdoch, who I think has got the left into a kind of tremendous tiz over the last 20 years. And I think this illustrates the dangers of treating a company mythically. Now, Google is a great company in many, many ways, but one of the most interesting is how it builds its own mythology up. About 3 years ago, I commissioned somebody to do an evaluation of the BBC as if it was a private company. What would its assets be? What would its turnover be? I did this because when you discuss this with BBC people, the room would go quiet. When you discuss this with Sky people, the room would go even quieter. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. What transpired was that the BBC would, if it, say, had a 51%, was 51% private, would be the largest media company in the world. It was also very clear that Rupert Murdoch's empire would have a time to life of about 3 to 5 years. It simply wouldn't exist after that. Now, when we published this story, the comments I found were very, very interesting. And one of us was, we can't do this because we must keep News International going. I love the BBC, I hate it, but we cannot possibly do this. And when I asked the commenter why, he said, it's better the devil we know. So here's somebody who was kept awake at night by Rupert Murdoch, actually wanted to keep him alive. The myth was more important than the reality. Now, I think Google trades on this myth very, very cleverly. It has enormous political influence, largely because our political class has given up on politics, and it looks to Google to kind of inspire it democratically. It looks to Google to do things that old socialists would expect to be done through government and organisation. It expects all kinds of wrongs to be righted through the power of technology and networks. Where I start to have reservations with Google is where it says, let's have a playing field for everybody except ourselves. One example of this is its own network. Google's private network and its private infrastructure accounts for about 10% of traffic on the internet, which is fine. It's one way of doing it. But it's also passing laws all over the world to hamper other people making money. Now, there's a couple of areas I just want to touch on, and I know time is very short, which are a little bit nerdy, but I don't think any policymakers have quite got to grips with them yet. And they're both strategies to ensure competitors in markets don't make money. Telcos don't make money at the retail, what's called the retail networks, the dial-up ISPs, or broadband ISPs. And it wants to make sure that copyright is effectively reduced, the value of copyright is effectively reduced to zero. The reason it does this is because it placed a particular bet 6 or 7 years ago on what shape the internet would be. It would have large data centers and bits would travel long distances between these data centers, and effectively the value of the material that's passing over them would be accrued by Google. So in terms of copyright, Google kind of becomes a collection society like the PRS, but the only digital collection society that's viable. And we can see this with Google Books, where it's already set up a monopoly registration society. Nobody else can make money from books except Google. Nobody else can make money from networks if it passes the laws that Google wants to pass, because nobody, say a BT, can't run a video-on-demand service over IP. To me, that strikes me as a little bit at odds with the idea of doing no evil. By all means, have competition, but trying to rig the market as well is maybe something we should look at closer. copyright, it's been allowed to do this because I think the middle class has just taken a huge punt on copyright. It's now almost axiomatic on the left to say that it's evil. So you have politicians avoiding politics on one side, you have the people who really should be coming to the aid of creators on the other side, also giving politics a pass. I want to sum up. I used to be quite a regular visitor to Google before it was astronomically rich and successful and famous, and I got to know the founders a little bit in those days when you could still get near them, and the founders' mentors. And I'll just sum up briefly a couple of quotes. Google still peddles this myth. At the Register, Cade Metz, who's in the audience, who's our US editor, coined the phrase the chocolate factory, for, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for Google, which kind of sums up that blissfully unaware notion it has. There was a quote from Google who says, "We want to be Santa Claus. We want to make lots of toys that people like playing with. But if you don't want to play with our toys, we can't really do evil things, because if you did, you'd leave our toy shop." To sum up in a nutshell, I've often found Google people regard themselves as the smartest guys in the room, much like Enron did. But they're often the least empathetic people in the room and the least sympathetic. And I can't really add to David's point, which is, are they being extremely, high spectrum autistic, or do they just not know what they're doing? Or are they the most evil? After 8 years of writing about Google, I can't really answer that question myself. But it's often the consequences of what people do accidentally that we have to live with. So.